Dobar dan, draga publiko. Nastavljamo s programom po rasporedu, Hud dah. Sljedeći na rasporedu nam je GUIDO SNEL sa svojim romanom, koji je zapravo roman s 3 prepletene priče. GUIDO SNEL nije samo nizozemski autor, nego je i prevoditelj sa naših prostora nizozemski jezik, a njega predstavlja u razgovoru Chris Keulemans. Uživajte u razgovoru.
Hvala, thank you. Yeah. That is what you deserve, Guido. And you'll get more at the end. Maria Todorova is also among us. Please, have a seat. This is a special moment because all the people who are not here are missing something crucial. But you're here. And you're here to see Guido Snel. And Guido Snel is a miracle man. He's a writer, a teacher, a translator. He knows this place, the region, very well. He speaks the language, of course. He has written novels. He has published a beautiful book, 9 Cities, which I hope will be translated here by book soon. Traveling through the region from Vienna to Istanbul, including Sarajevo, and encounters writers, kindred spirits along the way, and their dialogues are a method of countering the dominant stereotypes about the Balkans. And today, of course, we're speaking about the magnificent novel in Bosnian Smirna, Gora, with illustration by Boris Stapic on the cover, which could be the mountain, and it's also the octopus, about which we are going to speak a bit later. Guido, yesterday afternoon we were taking part in a conversation about imagining the Balkans. The book by Maria Todorova, which has been now published for the Bosnian readership at My Book. This was a dense, complex, fascinating talk about the stereotypes that have been building over the ages about this region, about how people carry them, internalize them, and counter them, and looking for a way forward through those stereotypes, beyond those stereotypes. How I guess we know each other from Amsterdam. I guess this study, but also the attempt to go beyond, is really an important part of your life, yeah? Your work, your conquest. Can you tell us a little bit about how you feel to be in the context of imagining the Balkans?
I think, and if I remember yesterday's conversation correctly, this is also what I tried to convey. Maybe it's also a generational thing. When I started my studies in my late teens, early 20s, so these were also the early 90s, right after the fall of the Berlin Wall. And I mean, apart from huge optimism, I suppose so, early 90s, Amsterdam was a changing city, and one of the things that was changing was its demography. And this in part had to do with the huge influx of refugees from Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, young people, fleeing away from military conscription. And all of them were extremely talented, and Chris remembers this as well, because Chris was a key figure back then in Amsterdam cultural life, in the public debate in the city, and hosted many of these very talented people. And they changed my life, and they changed my life at a moment when I also had the age to be profoundly influenced by, and I hesitate to call this an encounter with otherness, because I think this is an overrated notion, in the sense that people take it as a fact, and it's not. On the other hand, I also don't want to sort of, insist on this ideology that identities are always in flux, because they aren't. You need stability, and you need to be grounded at some point. But all of this whole sort of this balkanization of Amsterdam in the right sense caught me at the very right moment. It also enabled me to learn the language, for instance. I've attempted to learn other languages afterwards, and maybe the brain ages faster than we wish, but I never managed to learn another language to that degree as I learned Bosnian, Croatian, Serbian, or whichever way you would like to call it.
You went on to translate some of the major works of the literature here, Krleja, Dasha Drnic, Danilo Kish, Mehmedinovic from Sarajevo. This was a way of you entering into the literature, into the perspectives, into the language. And you went on to write about it, of course, to teach about it. Where's the fascination? What is the spark that keeps you burning?
Maybe I have to disappoint you. Maybe it was all coincidence.
Yeah, it was at the beginning.
It was at the beginning, and then it remained, of course.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You could have walked away.
Yeah. Well, one thing that certainly helped to keep the spark burning was that I was very fortunate to be able to translate writers, and also it meant that, you know, these writers were in demand. People wanted to read writers from this region in Dutch translation, and this was significant in all of Europe and the United States back then. So, you know, it enabled me to immerse myself into, for instance, the work of Krleja, who is, you know, sort of a profoundly Central European, Habsburg-oriented, very critical of Vienna and Habsburg, but still, I mean, the style, everything, the references, it's all. And maybe this was from, I shouldn't say a Dutch, but a Western European perspective, where, you know, by then already for decades, we had been oriented towards US fiction. This was a turning point for me, to actually find writers that dare to write sentences of more than one page, and also say something meaningful in doing that, not just as a trick. So it is actually possible in literature to formulate a thought that needs more than one sentence. Yeah. And it brings you something more than, say, John Steinbeck using 10 lines.
We're not bashing John Steinbeck.
No, not at all.
I mean, bless his soul.
Yeah.
But no, I understand the complexity, the density, the adventure, the irony, the wit, the tragedy, it's all there. Into this landscape that by now is so familiar to you, your novel, Smirna Gora, enters. Why, how does it fit into this landscape?
Well, it fits in many ways, and it also doesn't fit because eventually it allowed me to create my own story, which is inspired by all the experiences and many of the readings, but it still is something that I, through very harsh work, managed to create of my own. I think it starts with something that Dasha Drnic once said when she was in Amsterdam following the translation of Sonnenschein, the amazing novel that I hope you all have read. And this is a novel that extensively engages with historical facts, and it reframes, re-narrates the history of the Holocaust in Trieste and its surroundings. And she was being interviewed by a historian. And I'm beside with literature, I'm also very familiar with the historical perspective. And it sometimes gets in my way because the historical perspective forces you to take facts in a very specific way seriously. And if you want to create fiction, that doesn't always go together. Yeah. And so Dasha's remark to this historian who was interviewing her was sort of the starting remark of the conversation that also completely spoiled the conversation. She said, "I'm afraid of historians." because there's this claim to truth in what you're doing, and you're not always aware how limited your version of history is. And what I wanted to do, and I've been working for a very long time on this book. I mean, I started thinking about it in the late 2000s, 2008, 9. I wanted to bring everything together, which is really dangerous if you're going to write a novel. Sort of, maybe I can be James Joyce, a little bit like that. I mean, that doesn't work. We all know that. But it was a way to. It was a way to start writing in a literary, in a fictional way about a couple of lives, a couple of biographies that I had not discovered. I mean, they had been out there, but I thought this might be the core of something that can make sense in a literary context.
Based on deep research, based on
Right.
meticulous care for the historical facts as we know them, and based on the real situations. You composed it in the form of a triptych, 3 parts, 3 very, very different parts, which all of them correspond to a work of art by probably Jeroen Bos, the Flemish painter of the Middle Ages. Tell us a little bit about how this book came into being. So the idea of the triptych and the relationship between stories, which make everything factual but never solid.
Yeah. I mean, what I've been trying to do now that I'm thinking of it, I've been trying to inscribe this story into history as if it could have happened. And, it all, and continuing from, the fear of historians, it's ironical that the individual, the historical individual who enabled me to start writing this novel, conceiving this novel, was someone who was a fraud, a thief. So someone who had been sort of, toying with historical truth, for purposes that served his own gains. And this person was Ante Topic Mimara, who is a well-known, not recognized by all sides, but who was a thief, an art collector, also an art forgerer, and who has a museum in Zagreb. His collection is there, visible to the public. And when I first visited that museum, I did not know where I had ended up, because you do see some stuff that you think is genuine, but how do we know if something is genuine? There was also stuff that was evidently falsified, that was a fraud, but in such a way that it was too obvious to be true. And then I really asked myself, how can the curators of this museum keep this on the walls, because it's it's in your face. So I started reading up on the guy, and found the most amazing material that, yes, indeed, also opened up the perspective of Balkanism, because Mimara, who ended up after adventures that nobody agrees on what they exactly consisted of. Maybe he was a double spy for both the Soviets and the Americans after the war, but he ended up as head of the Yugoslav delegation in Munich, at the collection point where the whole famous story of the Monuments Man, where the Allied forces tried to retrieve all of the looted art. People like especially Goering, but also Hitler personally, with his, art collection to be in Linz. And Mimara is a sort of small crook, sort of a parasite in all of that, had, collecting some crumbles and.
Yeah. Okay, let's go back to that moment. By the way, let's check. Yeah, you are telling me that Topic Mimara actually existed.
Yeah, he was a real man. I mean, yeah.
Has anybody ever heard of him?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay, so he's not lying to us right now. Okay, good.
You know, and whenever you would take the train in the 1980s and still in the 90s, it was called the Mimara Express from, where was it, Munich to Zagreb.
So they named the international train after an international art crook.
Exactly. And now it's only called Mimara once you enter the former Yugoslav territories, because in the German lands, it is sort of, I suppose it's sort of known now. And,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But anyway,
let's go back to that moment. Munich, shortly after the war, collection point Allied forces are gathering and archiving and checking all the looted, all the artworks that the Nazis had stolen all over Europe, collected them as far as possible, trying to identify them and bring them back to the original owners.
Yeah.
Very, very complicated process. In the middle of that is the Yugoslav delegation, post-war Yugoslav delegation, headed by this Mimara.
Yeah.
And he throws, I mean, they're all working very hard, but he throws some excellent parties at night.
Yeah.
At the home of the delegation. Can you read us, apart from the book, about the party?
Yeah.
And about how the main character, Edgar Auerbach, who is a German Jew who went to America and came back to Munich because he's an art historian, because he's essential in identifying the art pieces and identifying the original owners.
Yeah.
He's invited to one of those parties. Let's have the party.
I'll read it in the Bosnian translation.
By Goran Saric.
Goran Saric, the poet and translator who also lives in the Netherlands. Not also, because I don't live in the Netherlands. What am I saying? So, with thanks to Goran. And I haven't practiced. Chris overwhelmed me with this request, so if I get stuck, excuse my apologies for my Bosnian. Njemačka se normalizuje, München slavi. Uvečer, dok Auerbach šeće ulicama, gola, tanka stabla tek zasađenog drveća tamno se ističu na kolebljivoj svetlosti koja se sad širi gradom. Tu i tamo iz jarko osvjetljenih vila odjekuje žamor, džez. Francusku delegaciju bije loš glas. Ima novih poslovnjaka, kad ljudi koji su se vratili iz Švicarske. Ponekih koji su primijetili spoj kriminala i krivice i naprosto nastavili tamo gdje su stali 38. ili 39. godine. Der Lindenbaum, kafić, je puniji nego ikada. Tamo imaju čitav bend sastavljan samo od Amerikanaca i ona pjevačica od Božića je ostala tu. U Collection Pointu se u međuvremenu s izvjesnim uzbuđenjem priča o feštama koje se priređuju u jugoslovenskom izaslanstvu. U konfiskovanoj vili koja je dodijeljena toj delegaciji toče pjenušač i ranjsko vino. Serviraju pečenje, a naravno domaća rakija teče u potocima. Novi šef, Topić, veliki je zabavljač. Auerbach je već više puta odbio njegov poziv. U odlagalištu se nalazi na stotine tepiha i goblena, ali nijedan od njih se ne slaže s opisima i često mutnim fotografijama koje prilaže Topić. Taj Topić je zapravo komičan lik, ili lopov, ili oboje. A trguje li za sebe ili za vladu, to nije mnogo važno. Kruže priče o ostalim članovima delegacije, koji bi mu se rado krvi napili. On ih ponižava, razmećući se znanjem, svojom privatnom zbirkom, a oni su šačica bez, ovo je vrlo složeno, bez Veznjakovića, nemaju pojma o umjetnosti, o ljepoti, o dobrom vinu i finim jelima. Taj čovjek je šarlatan, nezgodan, ali ne više od toga. Kad mu već po 100. put stigne takav poziv, Auerbach mora otići. 29. novembar je nacionalni praznik, Dan Republike. Bilo bi sasvim nepristojno kad bi ignorisao takav praznik. Vila je prepuna, a usred ciganskog orkestra koji je našao put do sredine salona, takozvanih poznatih lica iz Demi Monda, koji je Auerbach do sada ovdje u Münchenu izbjegavao, pukovnik je neosporna centralna tačka. Stoji laktom naslonjen na kamin, svojom skromnom visinom to jedva postiže i samo brblja. Ostalih članova delegacije nigdje ni na vidiku. Priča o maču što mu visi za pojasom, njegov stravični engleski jezik, italijanski akcent koji probija kroz njega, njegov slavenski izgovor. Putovao je Japanom, priča, na poziv carskog dvora da restaurira stare majstore koji su minulih vjekova uspjevali da se probiju o to zatvoreno carstvo. Svugdje je pobrao lovorike za preciznost kojom je uspjevao izvući sjaj originala ispod prašine i prljavštine. A kćerka iz jedne stare porodice samuraja je poludjela za njim, bacila mu se pred noge. Otac joj je pretijao, ali nema lijeka protiv ljubavi. Onda mu se otac bacio pred noge. U opasnosti je bila čast porodice. Ako on, Topić, ima ikakav osjećaj časti, zaprosit će njegovu kćer. Vidio je tugu u očevim očima i shvatio šta mu je činiti. Otišao je pod okriljem noći, noseći u prtljagu prastari mač koji mu je poklonio njen otac. Osjećaj časti, prijatelji, sve se vrti oko osjećaj časti. Začuo se aplauz. Kad se Topić odvojio od kamina, po podu mu se vukao vrh korica poput hrome noge šepavoga konja.
So Topić disappears there, but he will return later. And of course, everything he has been telling the people about his work in Japan and the woman who loves him and the sword that he got there, it's all lie.
Yeah.
But immediately you sense from this quick piece it's a kind of film noir. It's a page turner. It's the post-war chaos. It's mystery, spies, murders, double agents. Topić is this shadowy figure in the middle of all that. Later on, we end up in Belgrade after the war. Comrade Tito has ordered the artwork that's been stolen from Yugoslavia to be brought back to the country. Describe Belgrade the way you describe it in the book. It's to read it now, it's a very dark, shady, spooky, dangerous place.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that now I didn't see this question coming. Maybe it's important to tell that Yugoslavia had only 2 paintings to be retrieved, one Rembrandt and one Tizian. And Topić managed to leave the collection point with a whole train wagon full of stuff. How he pulled it off, we still don't know. I created my own version of it.
182.
182 works of art, which, you know, I mean, it's admirable in a sense, I suppose. So Belgrade in the 50s. So these are dark days. These are after the crisis and sort of the birth pangs of the third way, which were painful. I mean, people ended up in prison on Goli Otok, in Dalmatia, the prison camp. And what is going on in Belgrade, when I try to, all the shady sort of Cold War stuff, I didn't want to redo John le Carré also, because, that would be sort of, in a way, a sense, also balkanizing the whole setting. But what I did, I relied on my own experience in the 1990s in Belgrade. So I chose the exact same hotel for the sort of the central events, and Auerbach's stay there, as the one I was staying in often in Belgrade in the 90s. And when I was staying there, it was the Hotel Majestic, that people who had a longer memory than just the 90s started to explain to me that this used to be the hotel where, for instance, foreign guests were often placed, because it was full of bugs. It was bugged, from top till down. It was also a hotel in the 90s where sort of the whole, sort of the decay of Belgrade, which, used to pride itself in sort of being the center of the country. And but now, you know, with the mobsters and the war criminals, Arkan used to hang out there, and sort of, you know, and the actual fear that I sense there sometimes. And I try to convey that in Auerbach's experience of Belgrade in the 50s, because, I mean, this was an extremely dangerous situation that he found himself in.
You describe it very well. And by the way, I recognize this. I was there a couple of times in the 90s.
Yeah.
Spooky. Maybe we should leave this there, leave Auerbach in the Hotel Majestic in Belgrade in 1950. Cliffhanger, because you're going to read the book and you will see what happens. Because we can move on to another main character of the book. We can talk hours about the book, yeah, but let's talk about two gentlemen, main characters in the book, because they show us also the different facets of your writing. So this first part is really a page turner. The next part is very different genre. It's a travel journal across the Mediterranean Sea, on a ship headed by the legendary Captain Piri Reis, very close to the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, in about the year 900, I believe.
In the Islamic
Counting.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's what is it? It's late. Oh, the counting. Oh, sorry. Late. Is it 15th or so? It's 15 something, right?
Yeah.
Sorry for the.
The experts are in the audience, fortunately. And this captain, tell us about him. What is his mission?
Well, maybe before I will do so, Chris. But before I do so, I was struggling with Mimara for amongst others, for the following reason. I did not want to give him the honor of being the central character, because I loathed him. He was a criminal, and I said, if I do this, I might be balkanizing my own novel. And so I was struggling with this, and I was working on all of this when I was living for 1 year in Istanbul. And I was thinking that, this whole question of authenticity in art, how can you recognize an authentic painting? And then, if you then find out that if you have been immersed in a painting for a long time and find out it's a fraud, what does it tell you actually? So there's much more to this thief. It's about drawing and painting, and it's about representation. So I was in Istanbul, and during one of the last days, during my stay there, I visited an exhibition in Tophane with maps from the Mediterranean, not personally drawn by, but sort of created in the presence and commissioned by Piri Reis, the seafarer. And these are originally, they're very small maps, but art students from Mimara University had enlarged them. I mean, huge enlargements, and they were aesthetically, they were astonishing, but they were also puzzling and estranging in a way, because they did cartography in a way that, I'm not a seaman, I don't have experience, but I reckon that if this is going to help you navigate, this is something entirely different from what sort of the Western European eye, and Amsterdam for sure has its cartographic tradition. So this is something different. And this triggered me. So this is another way of how we as human beings, by drawing, try to navigate in the world. And so it's another form of art in a way. So I decided to make out of Piri Reis sort of the central character of the central part of the triptych.
Yeah. His mission is to map the Mediterranean. He sails all around it.
Yeah.
And he is a very straight up, decent, principled, loyal man.
Yeah. Very loyal also to factuality, to facts.
Yeah.
He does not tolerate lies, and also not, for instance, religious zeal. He loathes that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you imagine his whole Mediterranean journey on the ship, painting the character, beautiful character, who is so true to the facts in your imagination. So again, as a writer, you have to imagine and make us believe in the story of a man who believed only in facts that he could see and touch.
Right.
Must have driven you crazy every now and then.
No, it was great fun.
Oh,
It was the part that I enjoyed, tremendously. Because what I did in a sense was create a pretext to actually do fiction. So I finally liberated myself from historical facts. So first I set for myself the historical record straight, with the help of these amazing maps that were, in my perception, completely almost surreal. And, on the basis of these historical artifacts, I could do fiction.
yeah. No, it's beautiful. I think it explains to me also why the book speaks to me so much. You feel the foundations of fact and history, and you experience the liberty of the imagination. Beautiful. Now, let's read another part of this. There's a problem. The cartographer of the Sultan, Captain Piri Reis, is on the boat, but there's no black ink anymore. Now, in those days, you couldn't just, hop off board in any harbor city and walk to the shop and buy black ink. But the octopus, deep down in the ocean, has black ink. So the only solution to their problem is to kill the octopus.
Right, and there they go. Okay. I find it challenging to read the translation, I have to say.
He was doing all right just now, yeah?
Yeah. Mlad mjesec učinio da se more tek malo čuje, jedva vidi. Brod je lagano plovio mirnim valovima, slab vjetar ujedra. Na figuru na pramcu, za koju Piri nikad nije umio razaznati šta predstavlja, tako je nespretno načinjena, nimfa, bik, čvornato drvo, stavljena je velika baklja, koju su stalno držali upaljenom i svako malo doljevali pomalo ulja. Na pramcu je stajao i Piri, skupa s Hasanom i Grkom Stavrosom. Hobotnice ni na vidiku, rekao je Piri Hasanu. Strpljenja, kapetane, odgovori Stavros. Vredi pokušati, kapetane, reče Hasan, lagano važući harpun u ruci. Vođa palube bio je u pravu. Bilo je još najmanje 3 dana plovidbe do najbližeg grada. Već su počele da mu izmiču pojedinosti iz sna. Možda naredna noć donese nove snove. Opazio je poznat potez vođe palube. Od svih članova posade on i Hasan išli su najdalje. Arapsko more, Goa, veličanstveno putovanje u Japan. Ono kad je otišao kao drugi oficir, vratio se kao kapetan, zatrpan blagom i počastima. Na svjetlu od baklje ocrtavao se Hasanov profil. Piri, koji je imao izuzetno pamćenje oblika svih obala koje je oplovio, još mnogo ranije je utvrdio sličnost između Hasanovog profila i zavjetrinske strane otoka Piremude, nedaleko od Venecije. Široko čelo, jednako široka brada, a između njih neupatljiv nos i tanka usna šupljina. Ne baš riječita prirodna luka. Hasan je odabrao posadu za putovanje. U blizini je, uvjeravao je Stavros ostale. Nakon sat vremena pažljivog posmatranja, brodom prođe neki drhtaj. Ljudi zavikaše i natiskaše se na pramcu. Ali životinja, ako je tu bila ona, nije se opet pojavila, pa se sve opet utiša. Nakon sat vremena drugo identično drhtanje. Ova zvijer sigurno nije luda, rekao je sad Stavros. Zna da je pokušavamo uhvatiti. Opet se skoro svi okupiše na pramcu. Neki su, vidi Piri, pripravno držali nož, a on se na to nasmiješi. Iskusni mornari, a jako se plaše onog što živi pod vodom. Sav brod zaškripa i učini se kao da se diže. Ljudi se grčevito uhvatiše za poprečnu jedrenu motku, zakolute od konopa, stadoše prizivati Boga. Pramac je povučen na dolja, a prva dva pipka obgrliše jarbol, opasno blizu baklji. Glava zvijeri ostala je nevidljiva, brodski trup i tjelesina životinje strašno uzburkaše more. Sad, povika Stavros, a Hasan, poput vještog bacača koplja, ispali harpun iz ruku, ravno u uzburkanu vodu. Piri zadrža dah, po palubi se klizila još dva pipka, svaki dug najmanje 2 metra, a onda se pojavi glava. Često je u mnogim lukama gledao koraljine lignje na gomili, morska sluz, ali nikad nije vidio hobotnicu ovih razmjera. I zastade mu dah u grlu kad na sebi primijeti pogled zvijeri, samo na čas. Bio je to zamišljen, bolan pogled koji je odavao svijest o sopstvenoj pogubnoj grešci. Svjetlost je bila neodoljiva, a za nju se pokazala kobnom. Stavros je bio u pravu. Pipci popustiše zagrljaj, harpun zadrhta u tjelesini i na jednom brzo iščeznu. Konopac se strelovitim brzinom odmota i nestade u tami. Piri podiže ruku i stavi prst na usne. Ljudi se utišaše. Hasan usmjeri brod ka harpunu. Jedino svjetlo dolazilo je od baklje. Said, koji je klečao i pretraživao vodu, promrmlja neka od imena Božijih, a onda zari glavu u ruke. Kapetane, otvorio se pakao. More je crno i gusto kao sirup. Zaječao je. Glupost, reče Piri, koji dođe i sjede kraj njega. Ispruži ruku najviše što je mogao i vrh kaži prsta potopi u vodu. Zvijer je u smrtnom strahu ispustila mjehur s tintom. To i kažem, rekao je Said, otvorio se pakao.
It's such a fascinating scene. The captain needs the ink to map the Mediterranean on which all these sailors will depend in the future. He needs the ink. The octopus carries the ink. The captain and the octopus face each other in the fatal moment, and then the octopus empties the ink. So now the captain is floating on the surface of exactly what he needs, but it's not for him. Somehow it feels like there's so much in that single scene.
Yes, it also becomes a pun in the book. So every new chapter, whenever they have to make a stop, they are in search of another color of ink. Mm-hmm. And, yellow comes with buffaloes and, so and this, leads them to all kinds of adventures. Yeah. But it's this scene, it's both, it's metafiction in a way because it makes you, supposes to make you think about drawing, representation, how do we do this as human beings, but it's also simply adventure. Mm-hmm. Things are happening. It shouldn't, I also, set myself the task of writing a novel in which not a single scene would be boring in the sense that it would be. Mm-hmm. So it should always be plotted. Yeah. And not just, it shouldn't be an essay.
Yeah. They're exciting in themselves and they also are part of a larger, very adventurous story. So the lesson to any novelist here is never write a boring chapter. Okay? That's it.
That's it. Yeah.
Not bad for what is it, Friday afternoon. We're running out of time. Is there anybody with a question of life and death before we close off this session? Guido will be here, of course, in person, signing the book that you have bought in the bookshop. Guido, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for coming. Yeah.